What do you make of materialists speaking about these kinds of assertions from people and saying things like just your brain chemicals firing and your neurons firing in some weird way, and it's just like a hallucination?
If we do not have a shared, definitive understanding of what consciousness is, how could we possibly say that a machine is conscious? I think it was in March of this year. I did quote from the Gita, just made the argument of, we have this manic race to create AGI. Part of that race is to create sentience.
I think understanding consciousness and understanding what we are and understanding the causes in the world are not just mechanistic.
It really is God's final exam for humanity. Now, whether you want to look at that as nature or consciousness or whatever you want to call that, I believe that it's God working through us. I've had that I know this is it. I know this is right. I know this is where technology is going to go. And, time we know is an illusion. Kind of touched on time earlier, but someone just wants to take a science-based approach to time. They should read The Order of Time.
And I remembered in my mind's eye walking around Lake Austin. We started at the library. Some very profound experiences, as you know. He said that the message that he received is that the frequency and intensity will increase.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Love Conquers Fear podcast. I am back from Lake Tahoe, where I was with my friend Morgan Linton. That was an awesome episode. I really enjoyed doing that with him. And he leveled me up in AI-powered programming, which was really cool because I've been programming since I was age 7, and I got very into Claude Code with him, Cursor, Warp, which is an AI-powered terminal, of course, GitHub, and created quite a bit of code as a result. And now I'm kind of unleashed in terms of my coding ability all over again. It's like a revisit to my childhood and what eventually got me to become an entrepreneur in the first place. And I have to tell you that my guess, and Morgan and I were talking about this after that podcast ended, is less than 5% of the engineers in the United States are using these tools the way that they should be. And I've seen firsthand how there's some resistance. And I will forever be changed as a result of using these tools for the first time and now using them regularly, because when I start my next companies in the future, or whenever I'm investing in a company, I'm going to make sure that I really assess the CTO, the VP of engineering, to see if they're already using these and how they're using them regularly to really make themselves much more productive. When you see an AI agent like Claude Code actually go and do the debugging for you and you're guiding it, really reminds me of Fantasia, where Mickey Mouse is kind of, animating everything. And that's what it feels like. You're essentially like you're in Fantasia and you're directing these AI agents. You're basically a choreographer. And now I understand what the CTO of Data.World talks about in terms of how all in we went with Claude Code at Data.World. When that came out, I think it came out in like April. And that was really the game changer at Data.World for us with coding, because Data.World's code was really, really complicated. This was not like a simple vibe coding type of thing. Vibe coding is like when someone uses something like Cursor to create a to-do list app and they've never programmed before. And it's cool that they can do that, to be clear, but all of a sudden they conclude like, wow, I'm a great programmer. And then once they start to build something more complex, they realize they need that systems level architectural thinking that only comes from having really worked with code a lot. And as a result, they end up having some pretty big walls that they run into. And then they're like, gosh, AI is not ready yet for someone with my skill set. And so they conclude that it's the AI's fault. But the reality is that systems level thinking is always going to be important. A lot of people ask me now, like, hey, my son, daughter are going into computer science. Is that still a good idea? And my answer is your children should do exactly what they're meant to do. If they're passionate about it, let them do it and run with it. And things will work out great. Will they be programming the same way they learned in CS? The answer is no. Will they require systems level thinking? That's always going to be useful in the world. But things certainly are going to get easier and easier on the path to the age of abundance for all. So anyways, if you haven't played around with those tools, I highly suggest you do. You'll be kind of blown away. Also, if you haven't used Perplexity's web browser Comet, and use the AI assistant, you can go to, for example, kayak.com, or let's say you're booking on American Airlines A.com, or you're shopping on Amazon, or you're in Gmail. Just go to those in the web browser with Comet, click on the AI assistant button, and on the right-hand side, you can just talk to it like you would talk to ChatGPT and direct it to do anything, which is really fascinating. It literally takes over the browser screen. If you haven't seen agent mode in ChatGPT, it does something like this, except it creates a virtual machine. It's a little bit different. But in this case, Perplexity Comet web browser literally takes over your screen and then starts to do what you want it to do. I just bought a couple of new tennis shoes from Zappos. I don't shop that often, but my tennis shoes were like 2 years old, and I could just go to Zappos.com, tell it exactly what I was shopping for, what type of colors, what my sizes were, and it just brings them up for me. It does all the work for me. So to actually see that, you're seeing a window into the future, and it's just a matter of time before the browser itself becomes an extinct concept, and we just direct agents. That we all have that Mickey Mouse Fantasia capability to direct agents to do things that we need done cognitively, like shop online. And then eventually this gets embodied inside robots, and then we can direct those again, like Mickey Mouse and Fantasia, to do infinite amounts of physical labor. Like I could direct robots in the future to just say, hey, on that hill, I want to build this tree house. And they would just go march off and do it with mechanical precision. Like that's the future that we're heading towards. And that's going to be very exciting. It's going to create a creativity explosion. And I'm not saying it's all going to be roses on the path to get there. I'm exploring in my book that I'm writing called Love Conquers Fear, Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All, really how it's not going to be all roses. It is going to be a lot of disruption. There's going to be a lot of job dislocation. But I really forecast a future of billions of personalized products and services that we really can't imagine today. It's like trying to forecast at the beginning of the internet all the new jobs that are going to be created as a result. This one's a little bit different in the sense that AI and robotics are going to touch virtually everything, every business, every organization, but that's super, super exciting. I also did come out with my science fiction novella called The Lattice. These started out as 3 short stories I wrote on Medium and my blog, lucky7.io, as well as LinkedIn and Substack. I mean, I put it everywhere. And I put a wrapper around it with this book, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm having fun with it. It's very ambitious book because I'm talking about the years in science fiction from the year around 2031 to through 2085. And I've had a lot of fun with it. I've got a lot of great feedback on it with friends. And so I just decided I'm going to put a wrapper around this. I'm going to put a conclusion on it. I'm going to talk about the ancient spiritual texts that show proof, if you will, of the lattice, and really come out with the science fiction novella. So I did that, and you can check that out on Amazon if you feel so moved. So today I'm very excited to have my friend Aneil on. He is a great entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and he is a scientist. And we're going to dive into a paper that he wrote and presented at a recent consciousness conference, which is all about, can AI become conscious or not? I think it's a fascinating topic. We actually hosted a dinner here at our home with Mark Gober, You saw him on episode 2 of this podcast. He's one of my favorite authors. He's written 7 terrific books. And at that dinner, we were debating on whether or not AI could become conscious. And I mentioned in the Mark Gober episode, and I want Aneil to hear this, that part of what hurt my heart at that dinner is there was one of the attendees, I won't mention their name. It wasn't Aneil, though I'll say that, who said, "Well, I've seen the job that humanity's done." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, like you've given up on humanity. Like we have to love humanity. Yes, we have lots of problems. I'm Jewish, there was the Holocaust. I mean, there's all types of things that humanity has done that had been really bad, but there are constantly acts of beautiful love and connection happening in the world of 8.2 billion people. And I get how you could get down on humanity if you're just constantly programmed by the media and social media and seeing all the bad things that happen, because in 8.2 billion people world, there's going to be a murder or something horrible happening every day. And that's why you have to deprogram and tune in to things like the Progress Network and things like Fix the News. Angus Hervey has been one of the TED speakers for the last 3 years at the main TED in Vancouver, and start to get some programming about all of the amazing things happening that are frankly buried by the algorithms. I'm a believer in the free press, and there's people writing really good stories about all the scientific breakthroughs and all the incredible acts of love that are happening. But if you're just getting the push alerts, boy, you're gonna think that we're horrible, because that's all that's being pushed at you because they're hijacking your amygdala. So you have to break out of the self-created matrix that these algorithms are putting you into, and you really have to deprogram yourself, and only you can do that. So, yeah, so I'm really excited. And Neil, it's good to have you here, buddy. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I've really been looking forward to this. That dinner that we had at the house, I'll never forget that dinner actually, because it was a really interesting moment in time. And we had amazing people around the table. And you made a lot of my favorite points at that dinner. I just have to tell you, it was really, really great. That conversation that we had. And it was interesting because actually you and I were a bit in the outliers there. I don't know if you remember that, but the majority of the people at that dinner, some of the most amazing investors and, AI, programmers, entrepreneurs, they kind of concluded that AI would become conscious. They really held out that possibility. And part of the reason why, for me, I am skeptical of that is actually a different reason, I think, than for you. But maybe we have some synchronicity on that front. You're approaching it as a scientist. I'm approaching it in terms of the divine self that we all have, our soul, and that a machine, I don't think, even though I believe consciousness is fundamental, I don't think would have the same connection to heaven or source or whatever, you want to call it, consciousness. I refer to God on this podcast, but I always tell people like, hey, replace that word with whatever makes you feel comfortable. If it's source, if it's consciousness, if it's heaven, whatever it is, like, just replace it with, a lot of people that are atheists, they still think that we live in a loving reality. So that doesn't bother me at all, but my knowing of it, I call it God. I think that God is the definition of love. But I'm skeptical that AI could ever become conscious because I think there's something divine. I mean, I do believe that we reincarnate over multiple lifetimes. I've read tons of books on this from many lives and many masters, as well as Journey of Souls. I've been on a real soul quest. I probably read over 45 books at this point in the last 10 months on everything from quantum physics to AI, to consciousness, to spirituality. And recently actually read the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know if you read the Gita before. I also read the Tao Te Ching. And these repeating patterns constantly show up in terms of the root of all spirituality, frankly, is this root of love, and this root of unity and oneness. So I just don't know if the quote unquote rules of the divine, and being Jewish, you're supposed to be very humble in the sense of what is the nature of God, and I don't know the nature of God. I can't possibly know that. Um, but you're very humble in the face of that. And I don't know what the rules are on whether or not, or if there are rules are at all on whether or not AI could embody a soul and qualia and all of these beautiful things that we experience internally when we smell a rose, or we taste a delicious meal, or we feel that emotion of love, or we ruminate on, an experience that we had that was, incredibly mystical, or whatever, it is that sentience embodies. I just am very skeptical that that will be in a machine, but
Well, you're preaching to the choir on
I
that
know.
one.
Yeah, why don't we talk about where you're at with your paper and the talk you gave at the Consciousness Summit? First of all, tell us about that summit overall.
That was the Science of Consciousness conference. It used to be called Toward a Science of Consciousness, and they dropped the first part.
Yeah,
I was
and that was in Barcelona.
That was in Barcelona this
Beautiful.
year. It's normally in Tucson.
Mhm.
And it's held by folks at the University of Arizona, Stuart Hameroff and Jay Sanguinetti and some other folks are involved in that. And I was there for the second
Mhm.
Science of Consciousness conference on a lark, on a complete lark,
Mhm.
because a friend of mine who's a diehard to this day materialist,
Mhm.
and I would debate
Yeah,
when I was in grad school, and he said, "There's this conference." He said, "Let's go."
yeah,
And
yeah.
we just went.
And how
Normally I
was
would,
that when you first went?
oh God, that was 30 years ago. That
Wow.
was 30 years.
Okay, so it's been going that long.
It is the granddaddy of all consciousness conferences. And, Stuart has done such an amazing job,
Yeah.
making all of that happen. And that second conference was really remarkable because, I wasn't there for the first one, but I was
Mhm.
there for the second one. And I feel like the energy of that conference was there,
Yeah.
that it was all of the major thinkers,
Mhm.
and Ned Block and Daniel Dennett, um, David Chalmers, John Searle. It was just like a who's who of
Yeah.
all of the major thinkers in the
David
space.
Chalmers famously, wrote The Hard Problem of Consciousness.
That's right. That's right. And he talked about that. And that paper, I'm not sure how, I think that paper came out maybe the year before, and he gave it at the first one, and he spoke about it as well at the second one. And that really set a frame for considering this problem seriously
Yeah.
because, within the scientific world, there was just this notion that we would describe the parts
Mhm.
and we would do neuroscience, and that's what consciousness was.
Right.
And David made this very, very clear and compelling case in that paper, which I think is called Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness,
Mhm.
where he delineates the difference. And he says, you can explain all of the processes,
Mhm.
but the question is why any of those processes are accompanied by a feeling,
Right.
and any explanations that says, well, there's this other process or this other process, you still recursively have that same question. And that's not answered with this material description of what the parts do.
Mhm.
So that's really what the hard problem was. And I kind of galvanized that community to debate,
Mhm.
not just to agree on that topic. There's
Yeah.
still significant debate
Like,
amongst
I've read so many books on consciousness at this point, and so many articles too, and they seem to diverge quite a bit.
Yeah, and there's still that very hardline materialist viewpoint.
Mhm.
There are people who will say, neuroscientists, very often neuroscientists say that that's not even a useful question. It hasn't moved us forward scientifically, and I think it will.
Mhm.
I'm convinced it will, and I think it's a very important problem. It's a philosophical position, not a scientific one, but it points out that science is ignoring something.
Mhm.
And, there are other thinkers who've made arguments about this. There's one called Mary's Room. I don't know if you've heard of this one. Um,
I haven't. No.
Mary's Room. sort of illustrates this in a graphic way, where there's there's a brilliant neuroscientist who's knows everything about the brain, understands how wavelengths cause various neural firing patterns, is very well studied in it, but she is gray, and her eyes are gray, and her hair is black, and the room is only in black and white, and anything she sees is only in black and white and shades of gray.
Mhm.
And then one day, Mary leaves the room,
Mhm.
and she sees the color red.
Mm.
And so this brings
Allegory of the cave by Plato.
that's right. And the point of this argument is to say whether all physical information which Mary studied is a complete description of the world. And this Mary's room story shows that there's actually some other information that Mary didn't have, that there was this color red.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of us, that doesn't seem to be a question to debate. I mean, obviously, there's this phenomenal experience that we have of all these sights, sounds, and feelings that are not reducible to just explaining parts moving around. There's
Mhm.
the experience of it.
Mhm.
And that ranges from mundane things, from like what I see or hear, to, mystical experiences.
Mhm.
And so that's the part that science has really kept at the fringes
Yeah.
and is now starting to become part of mainstream science. There
Yeah.
were articles in Science and Nature testing two major theories of consciousness,
Yeah.
testing multiple, ideas in the space of consciousness and dealing with it as a first class entity.
Mhm.
So I think that we have to,
Yeah.
for a number of reasons. Mary's room sort of explains it, but, like even epistemologically, we know the external world mediated through these conscious experiences.
Mhm.
I infer that there's a real world. So if you're to talk to me about neurons or brains or, different kinds of data processing structures, for me, I'm inferring that those things exist because I'm having conscious experiences.
Mhm.
And so, it's a funny kind of state that we're in now,
Yeah.
400 years past the start of the Enlightenment,
Right.
where we're actually questioning whether something that, most people have taken for granted, that these experiences are real. That's, there's a cadre of people who are trying to shove that to the side and say that, don't look there. That's not an important problem. We should just describe the parts.
Mhm.
And I think that we've been in that debate for some time, but I think that there's energy gathering
Mhm.
to take the problem very seriously. And I think that when you do, um, we'll get to a new place in science.
Yeah. 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 I mean, science is supposed to be about the fearless pursuit of the truth. And part of what's held us back is the dogma of just accepting things the way they are. I mean, science itself, as I've discussed on this podcast, is starts with a miracle. You know, grant me the miracle of the Big Bang, and I'll explain everything else to you. And, I think that part of the suffering that we have in the world is the fall of religion, some of that for very good reason, all the kind of primarily man-made scaffolding that came around it. The Gita, one of the parts about the Gita that I didn't like at all is the caste system. Like, it actually starts out in a way with the caste system. I'm like, there's no way that God would want to divide us into, multiple hierarchies, and, that we would all be seen as, you know, divine beings that all should receive equal amounts of love under the eyes of God or consciousness or whatever you call it. And so there's been this fall of religion, which I think has led to a questioning even of the root of spirituality. While there's been a rise of science, which has been great. I mean, like, my whole career has been science. I mean, if it wasn't for computer science and all of the amazing people that came before me, there's no way I'd be having this conversation with you and have been a fortunate, technology entrepreneur. That
For
there's
me
you. I
too.
mean, yeah,
For me too,
yeah,
100%.
yeah. So I mean, I love science. I mean, I love science, but you can love science and spirituality and actually say, like, these two things have a lot in common. And, you know, as I discussed with Mark Gober, and he talked about this over the dinner, people like Max Planck became a lot more spiritual as a result of discovering quantum physics and seeing the unity in things, which very much is in Hinduism. Brahman freeze in and freeze out, right? A universe. And so that kind of coming together, I think, is a big part of what needs to happen for humanity. And I think part of the way it happens is through consciousness research. Like if we actually completely understood consciousness, then we would very much understand the nature of our reality.
I don't really need to say anything here because you're saying things that I very much agree with. And, the thing is that I didn't really have this view so firmly at the center of my viewpoint until I started thinking very carefully analytically about consciousness. I had put consciousness up on the shelf as like an asterisk. Uh, Science is great, it works. Consciousness.
Right.
It was just up on the shelf, and
Yeah.
I didn't really think about that impacting how I operated in the world, um, and the meaning of the world. I just thought there's a scientific problem, and I approached it as a scientific, an engineering problem,
Mhm.
and that really led me in a very different direction.
And that's what I love. And there's a lot of reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast. We've had so many great conversations. Um, but the paper, like, working at it from a scientific and kind of mathematical point of view, how would you summarize that you don't think it's possible for machines to have the inner experience that we have? Because this is actually a big debate going on. I mean, there's people that are falling in love with AI chatbots today. There's some people who've literally killed themselves as a result of thinking that they're conscious and then directing them to join them in the afterlife. There are people like Mustafa Suleiman, who's in charge of everything AI at Microsoft and is a co-founder of DeepMind, who has been posting regularly on LinkedIn and other mediums that we need to not treat AI as conscious. He's like, look, it is not conscious. I can tell you we are working on AI at Microsoft and it's not conscious. But it fakes consciousness well because we can talk to it, right? We can talk to it. We can share videos with it. We can show it videos. Can take this whole room and ask it to describe what's in here. It can talk to us in any language, et cetera. So it's very easy to start to think.
Very
Like,
easy for people to be fooled.
yeah,
And in my talk, I have this little gif of some roosters with their cockspurs looking at a red water valve.
right,
They're kind of looking at it like it's a chicken.
right,
And I think that's what's happening
right,
with humanity
right,
is they're getting confused by appearances because we can look at that situation and say, that might look like a chicken to you guys, but it's not.
right, right,
And that's just the appearance of it. So the appearance of producing words, they are able to do that.
mm,
But there's a real reality to whether the valve is actually a chicken or it just looks like a chicken.
yeah,
And I think it's exactly the same problem with AI.
yeah,
But it's a little bit more complicated. People have their reasons for thinking that AI is conscious. You know, it's a funny thing, just thinking about where all this came from and where science originated from and where our modern Enlightenment era perspective comes from. It comes from what Descartes and Newton and Leibniz. These were some of the foundational thinkers. And when you look at how they thought about it, Descartes, you know, famously said, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And he had three visions of the future of where humanity needed to go
mhm,
beyond superstition towards logic and reason. And he came up with a view that we can start looking at the world as a mechanism.
mhm,
But what people don't talk about a lot is that he argued very ferociously that we should not think of living things as merely mechanical.
Hmm.
And he said that, and that, he had this very nice mental model of this mechanistic world, and consciousness didn't fit into that. So he said that there's a soul and somehow it interacts. And that's the asterisk, that we've just kept this thing
Right.
up on the shelf, and and that was that was the initial articulation of dualism.
Right.
And since then, I think, and Newton as well, was very convinced that though his equations described a deterministic universe, he felt, and he's written explicitly at great length, because he was very much influenced by Hermetic teachings and was searching for the original knowledge. We throw all of that side of Newton away and say he wrote a lot of crazy stuff. He was, into all kinds of crazy religious dogma. We should really ignore all of that and just focus on his equations. But Newton felt that his equations couldn't, and the forces between things couldn't be explained without something else that was non-mechanical. But he didn't have the language of, say, quantum physics and other weird things that we have today. And he was very concerned about the nature of the soul. It's not a word that I use very typically, but that's where those thoughts came from. And now we've gotten into a world where we've looked at dualism, found it very lacking, and have been left only with materialism, at least those of us in the science world.
Right.
And we've conflated this materialist view that there are only these objects with their, discrete properties interacting with each other as the only serious educated view that you could have. But of course, quantum physics fuzzes that up now for
Right.
us a little
Right.
bit. So
Yeah, there's been no reconciliation really between classical science and quantum science. And we
they
don't know.
don't agree with each other.
Yeah, they
The
completely
equations.
disagree. It's almost like a mathematical bridge.
Yes, and we're waiting for the unified theory between those two things. But what quantum physics has told us is there are things which aren't, based on what physicists call local realism, which parts only have discrete state. They're actually states of the world that are correlated with each other across space and space, at least. And some people also speculate time. So there may be retrocausal effects depending on certain interpretations. But, this question of are AIs conscious? Well, that comes from this notion of functionalism. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. That's the simple idea.
It's so funny. I was just about to say that. I didn't know if that's a Southern saying or not, but I've definitely heard that one growing up many times.
Yeah, and
Part of our psyche.
if it looks like a chicken, it is chicken. It's kind of the same thing, right?
Right.
Um, and you can kind of understand why people might think that. How else could we assess it? I can't see your consciousness. I only know of mine. So if it looks like it's interacting, it must be conscious. Isn't that science? That's kind of the reasoning that I think many people are applying to it. But as a biologist, I would look at that differently. It's a unusual phenomenon. I only have one example of it, and it's in me. And I only can presume that you and other people have it, might presume that other machines have it, but that wouldn't be a good move, I think, as a biologist, because you are compositionally, structurally, and operationally similar to me. You have a brain, I have a brain. We know that the brain mediates consciousness. So, as a biologist, if I were to study this phenomena, I would say, what's the appropriate model system? Well, it's not something that's structurally, compositionally, and operationally completely different from us. It would be something that's similar. That doesn't mean that something else couldn't be conscious, but we don't even understand it yet.
Right.
And so I think that that's a first place where people go wrong, and saying, because it just looks like it, then it should be. And that's the only test we can have. And I don't think that that's true. I think that there's science we can do. And in fact, there's science we've already done. Any of these experiments on patients who are awake under brain surgery and then they're stimulated is an experiment, and it demonstrates something, that there's a correlation and there's some mediation of this physical matter and our conscious states. You can stimulate somebody's brain and then they can hear music. So that shows us this.
Yeah.
We don't have any way of testing that, and we don't have any theory of consciousness. So we shouldn't go presuming that machines are conscious. Like, imagine if I want to study cell division. And then I said, hey guys, look, this rock is also round like cells. I'm going to study cell division now. That would be stupid, right? Nobody would take that seriously. And I don't think that we should take, searches for consciousness and AI seriously on just that basis. You really want to approach this from a scientific perspective, not from a theoretical and philosophical perspective. There's this notion of functionalism, which is roughly, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. But there's so many problems with that, which we can get into.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me what the. I mean, to me, this just sounds intuitively like, of course. I mean, it's like completely obvious to me that if we do not have a shared, definitive understanding of what consciousness is, then how could we possibly say that a machine is conscious? I mean, how could we, if, you know, I actually tackled this in a article I wrote in, gosh, I think it was in March of this year, where I did quote from the Gita. And I just made the argument of, we have this manic race to create AGI. And part of that race is to create sentience, but we don't even know what sentience is. I mean, I've read so many books at this point, as I was saying, on consciousness, that they really do disagree with each other. I mean, one of the most maddening ones was Anna Harris's book, Lights On. It was just released as an audiobook, and it's her discussions with all these different, consciousness researchers, discussing everything from panpsychism to you name it. And she ultimately concluded that consciousness is fundamental. And that's where I'm at. I think our brains are receivers for consciousness. And I think there's something very divine and loving about consciousness. But, this seems so obvious to me, but I'm curious how you approached it scientifically in your paper. I've read your paper, but for those watching this, and I'm going to put it in the show notes, how do you say, look, just mathematically, this is impossible in a world of bits, in a world of ones and zeros, and the way the, Turing machine works, which essentially is the architecture of all computers today. How do you approach it from that standpoint to say to people like, okay, A, you don't know what consciousness is, but B, on a theory of what consciousness is in terms of how rich it is, this is why a machine can't even do it logically.
Yeah, I think that we should be able to conclude with absolute certainty. And I normally bracket a lot of my statements with if X is true, then we might conclude this. But I think with this, at least I will say that the building blocks of this argument are certain and sound. And so that leads me to conclude that the argument is not just sound, but also valid, and that we should just conclude that machines can't be conscious. So I'll get into that. And machines are great because they really allow us to think very carefully about the problem because we design them, we know exactly how they work. They're actually formal systems so that, we don't have to just think about silicon chips and get mystified by maybe the electricity is doing something weird. You can make a machine out of gears. You could make it out of water valves. You could have computation that's based on pen and paper. They're just formal systems, and they're mathematically equivalent, and that's called Turing equivalence, which I know you know about.
Yeah.
And what that means is that any output that's produced by ChatGPT could be produced with pen and paper. And that immediately should raise some eyebrows. And you would think, well, doesn't this produce a lot of problems, for your theory of consciousness? Like, is is the computer conscious when I'm writing the last digit of the output? Is it when my pen goes down on the paper, when it's halfway through that number, or when it's finished the number, or when it comes off the paper? I mean, it's such a silly kind of concept. And, if you say it's when the computation is understood that, or something like that, well, that's understood right at the very beginning of the computation because it's an entirely deterministic system.
Right.
So I don't really, right there, you've got these sort of arguments from incredulity, like how could this be? If it's purely computation, you have to account for these absurd situations if you take consciousness seriously. And that's where I start, is thinking about what does it mean to think about the information or the data. I won't get into that debate, but if you think about, just what we're seeing, just the visual field, if we just, focus on that for a moment, there are colors distributed across what seems to be like space. There's if we have a frame, there's spatial orientation, and then there's little bits of color across my visual field. And there's this concept called the unity of consciousness, which is well understood in consciousness studies and philosophy of mind. And what it says is that there's a gestalt that we experience, that there's not just one of these characteristics, but you see all of these things at once. That's very critical. So I don't just see the bird, I also see the sky behind it. I see the other aspects of the scene and, my current emotional state, the air on my skin, all of those are bound together in a single experience. And people, a lot of people will just buy that. But I think that you can even become more precise about that and think about, for example, a pure red field. So if you were to imagine, you close your eyes and look at the sun, that's like a pure red field. And you'll notice something, that you're not just seeing red, a little bit of red. You're seeing an extent of red. You're seeing red bound to spatial properties, spatial locations. And you're experiencing all of those bits of red at the same time. And so all of those properties are bound together in some information space. So there might be some, if we were to describe that mathematically, there might be some matrix or maybe some polar coordinates and colors that are all bound together. And that's a unified object. So that's the first thing that we must think about. And this is actually the great puzzle of consciousness, is this: how do we account for that when we know from neuroscience that the information that is being processed in the brain is distributed? So there are different neurons that are being activated based on sound or shape or color. They're in different places. So that's what's called the neurophenomenological binding problem. And so it says, how do you get this unified state from disparate parts?
And it's constantly,
And it's constantly changing.
it's constantly changing. And it's
Constantly
constantly, like, cells are dying, cells are constantly being reborn.
That's right. And neurons are firing.
Right,
There are
right.
all of these activities going on. And neuroscience has been very good at tracing out the circuits that are involved. And in fact, that circuitry is what gave rise to AI, because it inspired AI. Now, AI is built very differently from the brain right now, and people are working on new architectures, and we'll probably be able to replicate a lot of that
Right.
architecture.
I mean, LLMs are trying to replicate neurons in the way that they work. They're trying to essentially create digital neurons.
They are, and they're quite different in a lot of ways.
Oh,
Like we
yeah.
have action potentials, and there's information in the decay of the frequency in action potentials, and we just model cells and AIs as 0 to 1 values. Let's sort of summarize how strongly a neuron is firing, and the architecture is very different. Like our entire brain does not fire in order to do a compute, only the ones that need to fire. So we're still pretty different from brains, but that still doesn't matter. We could still write an AI that would replicate this same structure in a brain. But when you think about each of these events that are happening, they're separate, and in fact, they could be completely linearized. There's this Turing machine made of wood that's really beautiful, and you could go and look it up.
Yeah.
I think there's a guy, Jay Rydell, who made this, and it computes. You can see each bit computed one at a time, and it's a very good mental model for thinking about what's going on in a computer instead of getting mystified at the electricity that's flowing through a CPU. And it's a stepwise process. Every bit is set one at a time. And so what we know is that the physics of the movement of the bit is driven by gears. And that's the same physics that describes your lawnmower. But the lawnmower is not conscious. I don't think any computer scientists think that a lawnmower is conscious,
Right.
but somehow this other machine that is using just forces pushing on each other is conscious.
Right.
So physics is the same, that's governing the movement of the parts. What's the additional extra stuff that's on top? And
I guarantee you, by the way, someone watching this or listening to this right now, like what you said, the lawnmower is conscious.
somebody thinks that's conscious
No, I
too.
know. I'm just saying that someone watching this is like, definitely went to that lawnmower is going to attack me, right? Because the psyche of machines are going to destroy us, from everything from the Terminator to the Matrix to, one of the things in Judaism is the story of Gollum and Prague, where the rabbi animates the Gollum, it becomes sentient, destroys the synagogue. I actually have a Gollum from Prague in my bathroom on the counter, like just looking at it every day. And I do not think that's the existential risk to humanity. I think the biggest risk is ourselves and our technology.
I completely agree. I mean, there are.
This is it's called Love Conquers Fear, by the way.
I agree, and I think there are also moves to give AIs rights, which I've also written about, and I find that worrisome.
Yes.
And I hope we can cool our jets on that conversation.
Where you and Mustafa Suleiman are aligned on
Very much so.
on that too.
Very much so.
And again, I don't think we should even talk about that until we know definitively and scientists definitively agree on what consciousness is.
I agree. It's
As long as scientists are debating what consciousness is, I mean, scientists are not debating what a foot is or a meter. Like, there is a defined, I know that's a very simple concept.
no. I think it's very important
We
one.
need to know actually what it is if we're going to ascribe anything else as being conscious.
There's some 9 organizations that I counted that are arguing explicitly for AI rights right now. And many of them are predicating that on the idea that they're definitely feeling something, they can suffer, they can, feel joy, and so they need to be accorded rights from a moral perspective. And that's completely false. They do not, and they will never. And that's what I hope to convince you of. I don't need too much to do to convince you of it, but I'll lay out the argument. So there's this neurophenomenological binding problem. And then there's a binding problem in computers as well, because you've got all of these separate events that are just governed by simple physics. And, the dowel that's in the ticker tape of the wooden Turing computer, it doesn't leak its state out into the universe. It's on or off. And our interpretation of whether it's on or off is by looking at it and defining it. And what David Chalmers actually argued was that there need to be, if it's processes, if there are physical processes, I don't think he says if, I think he concluded that it must be physical processes. And in order to account for and solve the hard problem, you need new psychophysical laws that supervene, as the philosophers say, on our existing laws.
Right.
And this is the critical idea that somehow, information processing patterns, if you have the right information processing patterns, it's conscious. That's the idea. It's the complexity. That's what people say. It's feedback loops, or it's the hierarchical processing of information, and then something's conscious. And, my argument is a very simple one at the end of the day. One is, obviously I don't think that we should immediately ascribe or believe. That's a question to be answered. So now it's really a question of, what do these theories entail? And what they entail is a new set of equations that sit on top of physics that identify patterns. And here's where the problem is. Our physics does not rely on events from the distant past or even the recent past. When we write our equations in physics, they're based on the current state of the system. And we say that dx dt is equal to some function of x, of the state of the system at the current time. But if you're talking about patterns of activity, those are events that might be in the very distant past. Like, I could make a computer that's as big as the universe, that sends light signals between galaxies. And somehow nature would need to have laws that recognize this pattern that might play out over billions of years and then close a feedback loop at the end
Right.
of that time. But then that requires something to have that bird's eye view in nature that understands that pattern. And we'd have to have a new law that would be wildly non-local. So you need data actually from all of space and time in order to account for that kind of a computer
Yeah.
being conscious. And it's not just that kind of a computer, that's true of any computer. It's just a smaller scale. We're just mystified because it's in our human time scales. But once you realize this could be at any time scale, and I think the philosophers of computer consciousness say, yes, indeed, something like that could be conscious, like a nation of people interacting in a way that a computer does, they think is conscious.
Right.
Well, you're violating some laws of physics in order for that to be true. But even then, you've got this problem of what constitutes a state. Is it are there laws in physics that recognize a transistor and when, 3.5 volts is on or off? Like, how do we account for that? Even if you do account for that, and you say, well, somehow it's just patterns in the interaction of particles, you still got this problem of being able to identify those particles versus the ones that are in the lawnmower or in a glass of water for that matter, or, any subset of molecules of air. Why are they not conscious, but we are? Well, that's a very, very hard pattern finding problem.
Yeah.
And that, computer scientists know how to do that. And there are a limited number of algorithms for finding those kinds of patterns. Now, what the precise pattern is, the psychophysical laws are computing is unknown, but they'd have to have data from all of those events which are lost in space and time, and they would need to find those patterns. And that like the general problem can be thought of as something called subgraph isomorphism. And I actually worked on this when I wrote this language.
Mhm.
A language for understanding biology is computable and deterministic, by the
Yep.
way. So I've thought a lot about emergent phenomena in complex systems. I wrote the code that wrote the code for describing that. So I'm not shy of that stuff. I think that's good science. But here, what we're talking about is that there need to be laws in nature that would find patterns. And that's, finding complex patterns in other complex patterns requires something like what a chess algorithm does. It goes and searches for solutions, explores branches, comes back, explores another branch. It needs to maintain memory of the partial match that it found and then elaborate more matches. That requires memory, that requires energy and computation. You actually need a computer to solve those kinds of problems. And that's not at all what our physics looks like. We don't assume that there's a computer somewhere in the universe, like doing this multidimensional chess game solution at every infinitesimal time step of the universe. That's
Mhm.
crazy. That's like positing a kind of a computational God, and that's certainly not what the materialists are saying.
Right.
But those are the assumptions that are smuggled into all of these theories when they say things like, "Oh, it's feedback loops," or "the feedback loop recognizes itself," or "the mind is software running on the hardware of the brain." There are all of these phrases that really have no well-defined scientific meaning. In fact, they are pseudoscience.
Right.
That's what the field of consciousness studies, the mainstream field, is rife with pseudoscientific statements that are doing the bulk of the work in these theories. So there are like three main problems that I really don't see how anybody gets beyond.
Yeah.
This stuff, these kinds of assertions that there are histories of events and patterns in histories of events are simply inconsistent with everything we know in physics.
Right.
And they are certainly not saying that explicitly. And if they are, I think that they are really on the hook for something very, very difficult to explain, where they have to rewrite our physics. And that's not the proposal at all. The idea is that it's very simple. We've got this all sewn up. It's just patterns in these things. But in order to account for the unity of consciousness, you need to solve this problem.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's really well said. And, you know, to think about a machine that would be able to go into a meditation and imagine, the unity of all things, the presence of the self. I mean, one of the things you talked about earlier, with Newton is actually the self started way a long time ago. It was in the Gita, the discovery of the self. So it predated a lot of the scientists of our day. It actually is found in ancient spirituality.
Yeah, there's the Atman and Brahman.
Yes.
So there's the local individuated self and this global or unlimited self,
Right.
which I think people would identify with as God in Western religions. And this is the state that people report in mystical experiences, that there's some unusual state of consciousness where there's much greater expanded state of consciousness. And those are rare, depends on how we use the word rare. They're very common in a sense. They're much more broadly shared than I think we initially understood these kind of mystical states. And people report a reality that is more, seems more real than the experience we have in ordinary consciousness. So how do you,
In near-death experiences, I mean, there's just so much evidence of this. Anybody that's done a psychedelic journey sees that there's a reality beyond this one. But just if you just take this reality in and of itself, this reality, our human eyes see 15% of what is available to see in this reality. There are birds that can see, the magnetic fields and see that a tsunami is coming and their early warning signs. So their senses work very differently than ours do. And I find that super fascinating that even in the reality of matter, that we're in this earth school, that we only see 15% of that.
we're like Mary in the gray room?
We are completely like that. And if we could see everything, I bet it would be incredibly overwhelming. And the mystical states that you enter through meditation or through a psychedelic journey, it is a bit overwhelming. It's very, I mean, it's a lot, like, because the ego goes offline and you get this flood of consciousness. And it's part of what's led me to believe that definitely consciousness is something we receive. Because there's just so many things that have happened to me in the journey state that are not describable by science at all. Like, I have to turn to spirituality to even grapple with the implications. And again, this is coming from someone who, like you, loves science. I mean, I really do.
What do you make of materialists speaking about looking at these kinds of assertions from people and saying things like, well, that's just your brain chemicals firing and your neurons firing in some weird way. And it's just like a hallucination. And there's nothing more to it.
Yeah, I think, one of my favorite books that started me down this journey actually is Proof of Heaven by Evan Alexander. So he became essentially a materialist. He was raised as a Christian and he went through the motions and went to church and he became an incredible neurosurgeon, Harvard trained, I don't, I'm not a surgeon. I only know other surgeons. And the surgeons I know say that the neurosurgeons are the top of their field. These are the smartest people in surgery. And they tend to be, according to surgeons I know, pretty arrogant.
Did neurosurgeons tell you that?
No,
Or did other doctors?
this is other
Okay.
doctors who told me. And because they basically, the level of schooling, everything else that they had to go through and what they're working on, the complexity of it is such where, anyways, I don't know if they're arrogant or not, but Evan Alexander was one of those. And he would see his patients, come back and they would say, "Oh my gosh, Evan, I just had this incredible experience. I was surrounded by white light. I had this out of body experience. I saw myself on the table, and he just dismissed it. He was just like, whatever, they're just hallucinating. until it happened to him.
Mhm.
And that's an incredible book on Audible because you can hear the awe and wonder in his voice. But he had E. coli powered meningitis, which is super, super rare for an adult to get. And you're almost certainly going to be a vegetable when you come out of that because E. coli eats you from the inside. We all carry E. coli naturally, but when it goes out of control, it just eats it. And so literally would just eat your brain, and which horrible, really horrific thing to even think about. So he's 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 feeling this incredible pain, and he shouts out just spontaneously, not even religiously. He's like, "God, please save me." And then he goes into his coma. And in his coma, I just got chills telling you that, which tells me my soul is very embodied right now. Those are called truth bumps. And in this coma, he essentially is taken on a tour of what's in the beyond. And he sees the 7 levels of heaven, which are repeating through lots and lots of spiritual literature. And he is told he's going to be saved. And I don't want to give away the whole book, but obviously he survives as he wrote the book, and he comes back and he describes it as the ultra real, like something that's more real than anything else. And the amazing thing about me reading that book and how true it rang and all the things that happened to him and relating it to the psychedelic journeys I've had and the experiences I've had, like seeing my own body in a journey from above, from the perspective of the soul being out of body, and just so many other things. He he felt like this was now his calling because he describes that as the ultra real. This is more real than the actual reality that we're in. And he then made that his life's work, and wrote several books on it. The Map of Heaven is his second book. It's just as good as Proof of Heaven. But the neat thing about the Map of Heaven, it's actually mistitled in my opinion, is he relates it to other spiritual literature, the experience he had. So his son said, "Look, write Proof of Heaven and do not do any research about anybody that's had an experience like yours. Write it from the purity of your experience." And so he did. And then afterwards, he then did all this research to find, has this happened to people before? Is there spiritual literature about this? And the commonalities between his experience and those were very, very prevalent. And I have now had, I read this book in December. I have now had 6 friends tell me that they have had an experience like that, a near death experience. And if I was a hardcore materialist, these are friends of mine, I would have to just think that they're lying. I mean, I'd literally have to, it's kind of crass. I'd be like, okay, well, you've had a you all have had a common experience. So that's interesting. So did you collude somehow and come up with your common stories? And the amount of things you would have to believe in terms of the levels of deception for humanity throughout the ages to say these experiences were just made up hallucinations is just too, and then the commonality again with psychedelics, with meditation, people that are deep meditators, they have gone into these states where they have seen the unity of all things. That's also something you see through a psychedelic journey. And, in the book, you read the lattice, but one of the things that's cool in here is that I explore, like, well, how would the awakening actually happen? Like, how would humanity unite to realize that the actual reality we're in is one that's rooted in love? And you and I are genetically 99.9% the same. All human beings on earth are. And all this programming that we've received that creates division, uh, when babies are born and they're right next to each other, they're not thinking like, "Hey, I'm a Muslim, you're a Jew, or I'm man, you're woman, or I'm from this class, you're from that class, or I'm this race, you're this." They're just divine, beautiful, pure creatures. And then unfortunately, they get all the programming.
Mhm.
They inherit all the programming through lots of things. They're indoctrinated into programming. And, very sadly, if If they're indoctrinated into a terrorist group, then their programming is hate, hate, hate from the very beginning. Like, not just hate, but like kill, like from the very beginning. And that's really hard for someone to overcome because that has been their entire reality. They were in the cave, the allegory of the cave, and only shown hate from the time they were born. But, they're all divine at their core. Like all of humanity is divine at our core. So I think it's fascinating that, you know, I've met now, or I've had 6 friends admit to me that they've had these near-death experiences. I mean, I just read this book in December.
Yeah, so the same thing has been happening to me the last 3 years since I started thinking about this topic.
Yeah.
I've met so many people with I mean, I don't have count of how many people I've met who have had all kinds of anomalous experiences. And some of them are subjective reports, which that good materialist in me will not be able to categorize as something that is a definitive demonstration of some exogenous aspect of our consciousness. But then there are many of these stories. There's this near death center in I think it's in Wisconsin. Though they've been collecting stories, and they have these stories of people seeing things, veridical things,
Hmm.
that they could not possibly have seen
Yeah.
uh, at any point,
Yes.
except when they were out of their body and they saw a number on a light that was hidden from everybody above the room, above the operating table, or they saw other things. And so there are many of those stories, and they're all anecdotal. And so the hardcore materialists are going to say, well, they'll just wave it away because it's not easily replicable,
Right.
these things. And then there are these stories of these savants, and there are people with wild stories of acquired savant syndrome. I know, I know one, I know a few people who
Yeah.
either had deep psychedelic journeys and come away with profound scientific theories, which, when I heard it, I hadn't dipped into any of this literature. I was just an ordinary biochemist,
Mhm.
and one friend of mine, I don't know if you've met Bruce Damer.
I know of him. I have not personally met him.
Bruce told me his theory for the origin of life.
Mhm.
And I can say this because Bruce has a center called Minds, which is a multidisciplinary institute for novel discovery and sciences,
Mhm.
which
Good
is,
job. There's no way I would have been able to tell. I have no idea what
uh,
it's what it stands for.
and it's predicated on this idea that psychedelics can lead to deep scientific insight.
Mhm.
Bruce's story is absolutely remarkable, and you should probably have him on your podcast.
I will. I will.
Uh,
Yeah, he is on the list. It's his name continues to come up. His name is for sure on the list. I think he's fascinating.
Um, and Bruce had this journey where he was taken back in time through all of his generations back to the original hot spring pool.
Mhm.
And this being told him, this is where you came from.
Mhm.
He didn't tell me all this. He just told me the theory. And as a biochemist and cell biologist, I had chills.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because,
When you have chills, they're called truth funks. There's a great book, 11 Days in May by JD Messenger. He's going to be on the podcast.
uh-huh.
I've read that book twice now, but that is a sign of your soul being more embodied in your physical reality and getting you a message that it's correct.
Yeah, and Bruce's theory is, Bruce and David, Deemer, I deem that the most credible,
Mhm.
origin of life theory. Won't go into it, that's a whole podcast.
All right.
But that came from a psychedelic journey, and then there's another one where a friend of mine who was just a wealth manager.
Mhm.
Was a wealth manager, took high school physics, did a very, very profound DMT journey, almost accidentally. He didn't really know what he was doing,
Mhm.
and ended up with I won't say more than this right now because I don't want to dox him. Profound insights in physics that were later validated. And I looked at it. Sabine Hossenfelder talked about his work, and that came out of this 100-year journey that he took in 8 minutes. So, how do we account for that? There are all kinds of explanations that there's some sort of that's just endogenous and that's the brain unlocking some circuits that are now able to do math and have these insights. And even those things, the materialists can just say that's all endogenous. That's not exogenous. It's not coming from someplace else. But those are interesting and indicative.
I mean,
And then
and remember the materials are asking us to give them the miracle of the Big Bang.
that's
That
true.
they are asking for that. They're saying just accept
Well, they
it
would
was a
say
Big Bang.
our analysis, just by looking at the motion of the stars, says that there is a big bang. So they would.
They also said that the universe was collapsing back in, and now through scientific instrumentation, we've seen that it continues to expand.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
So lots of things that we used to say
Yeah.
in science that are absolutely disproven today.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I would say that they wouldn't hold on to those as religious beliefs. They just say, well, that's what our science indicates, and that's good functioning of science. But there are other things, the place where I think the scientific community is really blinkered is that they're not paying attention to these results because like consciousness is only a product of the operation of classical objects, neurons in our brains. And so these classical objects don't reach out into the world and find information there or do any of these spooky things because we understand how it works. And that's where I think that we can know at least in terms of ordinary consciousness that it is non-local. It has to be. And all of those theories are really pseudoscience. Like we should really understand them as true pseudoscience. This isn't a cultural statement. It's just an analytical statement. It's clear as day that you need non-locality. And so now the question is, how non-local is non-local?
Right.
What other kinds of information is accessible? And then that starts opening up the frame to things that were just ignored and ridiculed for many years because it doesn't make sense.
Right.
In the same way that Galileo pointing out what he did from his telescope just didn't make sense because that wasn't the church that was telling Galileo he was wrong. Those were Vatican astronomers who actually had an ontology for how the universe was constructed and how it was we were in this Earth-centric universe.
Right.
And his observations didn't make sense within that scientific theory, so they rejected it. And that was the same for Copernicus.
Yeah. They refused to look through his telescope.
And in fact, the Ptolemaics had a much better system because they had worked it out over a long period of time, and they had all of these gears that centered around the Earth, and all of the motions of the planets could be accounted for with more and more gears. And so his theories would not replicate all the results as closely as they had. So, they had good scientific reasons. They had their ontology, they had their framework, and then they were rejecting something that we accept to be true. And so I think that that's the same case now, that there are all of these exceptions that build up during a period of what's called normal science, according to Thomas Kuhn's idea. So science goes through periods of stability and then revolution, right? And there's a paradigm shift.
I think we're in a period of revolution
We
right now.
definitely in a
I mean,
period of
it is finally time where people are tackling the hard problem of consciousness with more of an openness to fearlessly pursue it. And that is, again, what science is supposed to be about.
That is what it's supposed to be about. It's a scientific method. People conflate materialism, which is a metaphysical idea. It says that they're only physical objects with properties, and that's really all there is, and you have to explain things from that. But that's not what science is about. Science is about having hypotheses and doing experiments. It's not about metaphysical and philosophical commitments.
Right.
And that conflation is really holding people back. They're very scared to say that maybe there's something else that we need to grapple with. And that's what's stopping people from considering these very weird phenomenon like near-death experiences because it seems to fly in the face of science. It's coming from communities very often who aren't conversant with science, and then often making statements that aren't scientific, and that this causes a clash between those communities. But they may be describing very legitimate phenomena. And if we open the frame and we understand, I think that everybody should just take to the bank that consciousness has to be non-local. Now we must look at all of these other phenomena to understand and validate them and verify them,
Right.
and find the most compelling examples of those so we can assess how non-local is non-local. What are the other kinds of non-locality there might be?
Right.
There are lots of reports.
And how exciting, right? I mean, because that's
Super
a
exciting.
whole new frontier. I mean, and I do think that pursuing that frontier will actually unlock some of the secrets of quantum physics.
I think so too. That's a great way of looking at it, right? Because right now we have physics and consciousness studies is this kind of fringe area that picks little bits of physics and uses it in their theories. But I think that there's another way of looking at things, which is to say, take consciousness seriously as a first class scientific phenomenon that needs to be explained. And then once you start doing that, what physics does that lead you to? And that's going to be a very real question. Like, leave aside all of these anomalous, sort of phenomena that are being reported. Just think about the ordinary problem in the brain. There's electromagnetic radiation as the action potentials are produced. There may be other states of those systems. Those are physical properties that we know are mediating the information processing in the brain. And we know that that is connected to consciousness. So there's a real non-local physics problem there. And that can help. We might have to posit new types of fields to account for that. We might use the existing fields. And then some of these very strange experiments with quantum random number generators and having people apparently influence them at a distance. I'm not claiming that that's definitely true. I have
There's been many studies. Actually,
many studies.
Princeton, where Mark Gober went to school, he covers this in his first book.
Oh, he was at
Did-
Princeton.
oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
He was
Famous.
captain of the tennis team. I mean, he was one of the top grads, went to go get the dream job, et cetera. And he was a hardcore materialist. And he was, when he was 31, he's like, nothing matters. It's just a random rock. There is no meaning to anything. And he became very depressed. And he was like, I thought I was chasing this materialism, doing the things I'm supposed to do and making the money I'm supposed to make. And he was like, gosh, there's got to be something beyond this. And that's where he turned to health podcast and then stumbled on this idea that consciousness is something you receive. And he's like, there's no way that's right. But he used his Wall Street research skills to go total meta-analysis on it. And that's what ended up with his belief that consciousness is something we receive, because he approached it very analytically and then documented all in his books.
Yeah, it's
And made his life much better. I mean, if you really get to know him, and it's cool that he's moved to Austin now.
oh, he's here.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. I always told him when I first reached out to him, on a lark because I loved his books, and I was like, hey, I'd love to just have you come to Austin and get some speeches. And
People are being drawn in here.
yeah, and he felt the energy, and he like immediately said, yes, I'll go.
Yeah.
And he
The new Athens.
Yeah, he and I became, it is true. This is like consciousness ground zero in Austin. And he came here, and I told him, hey, truth be told, part of my sneaky agenda here is I think you should move to Austin. Couldn't know that. I didn't know that would actually happen, but he's amazing, and he really has fallen in love with Austin, and he has moved here.
As have I.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we were going to leave in the first year and a half, and it was the people that kept us here. And this place is just so juicy.
Yeah, yeah.
People are really open-minded and supportive.
Yeah.
And it's the perfect place
It is
for thinking about consciousness.
Yeah.
It's amazing. there was something else, Brett, in what you were talking about with there's that unhappy, it's kind of like an unhappy realism that you adopt with materialism. This is not a reason I'm very reluctant to adopt something because it's gonna make me feel better if
Right.
it's untrue.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
I
Yep.
it's
Yep.
just
No, same with me. Yeah.
like the only but this shift in my perspective entirely came from this analysis. I was just
Hmm.
annoyed that people were saying that AI is conscious.
All right.
That was it.
All right.
That was it. And I thought, no, this doesn't make any sense. And I started analyzing it, started rejecting, these philosophical arguments and said, well, wait, what would this mean in terms of physics? That was it. But that really led me on a very different journey. And it's changed me.
Mhm.
And that I think is very interesting because there's a viewpoint where you look at the world as simply composed of material forces.
Mhm.
And then you start thinking about, well, you model human beings as Homo economicus. You think game theory is the rational and right way of dealing with people.
Mhm.
And it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And it creates this unhappy realist kind of phenotype.
Yeah.
People that, well, this is reality. Facts don't care about your feelings. And that's what the world is. And of course, you're going to be a little unhappy if you view things like that. But really thinking about consciousness and just like thinking about what it is and realizing like its status epistemologically is a really incredible thing to contemplate. Because once you get away from this broken and incorrect idea that it's
Mhm.
just a product of complexity in our brains, and you realize, wait a minute, like even epistemologically, I know about all of the stuff that's out there because I presume it's there actually. I don't even know it's there.
Mhm.
I know that I'm conscious. And Descartes talked about that.
Yeah.
That's cogito ergo sum. It's the essence of it, though he thought about thinking
All right.
rather than
I
experiencing. I
think
think,
therefore I am.
yeah, I think the Vedics would say, "I experience, therefore I am,"
Right.
or that's the it's self-luminous. That's the fundamental thing that we know exists, and that's an epistemological perspective.
All right.
But there's another one too, which is the ontological one, which is even if we grant, okay, we're matter, we are experiencing something, and so matter, we're touching the bare metal of the universe
Mhm.
in our experiences, just the color red, the sensations.
Mhm.
That is a capability. That's kernel code of the universe. And what that says is that the universe is filled with meaning. And it's a very, very weird thing to contemplate that meanings and qualities are fundamental parts of the universe.
Mhm.
And that's a very, very different perspective that you take in understanding what we're involved with, that meaning, this is a meaning filled
Yeah.
universe. And that is really, that has an effect. It's had an effect on me,
Yeah.
really coming to terms with that
You're
because
actually
that means,
describing why I've become so much more spiritual. I mean, for me, part of the I had a great life before, but part of the reason I'm happier now is I've done a lot of inner work. And sure, psychedelics have been a tool on that, but a lot of it has been reading. A lot of it has been meditating. A lot of it has been really going on this journey inside, from books like Gary Zukav's The Seat of the Soul. He talks, Oprah Winfrey says it's the most transformative book of her life. She really helped get him on the map. He was kind of a hermit living in a cabin, writing this book, not knowing if anybody would care about it, clearly like being channeled through him, like so many spiritual texts have been. And he wrote this book about a large part of the suffering in the world is the five sensory human being that just assumes that it's just what you can experience and that's all there is, versus the multisensory human being that has a communion with their soul. And if you open yourself to that possibility, you can actually talk with your own soul. And that is profound. Like to actually experience the sense of self in a meditation is a profound transformative experience. I mean, that's as profound as it gets, to realize that there is a, Brett sitting in front of you and an Aneil sitting in front of me, but that there's a soul that is having a physical experience in this earth school and is on a divine mission of its own that animates you when you find out what it is. It takes me back to a book that's not spiritual, but is spiritual in a way. Man's Search for Meaning, one of my favorite books of all time. Viktor Frankl, four-time Holocaust or four-time concentration camp survivor during the Holocaust, who says that the reason he was able to survive the Holocaust and all that suffering, I mean, suffering you and I cannot imagine, near starvation, seeing people just absolutely exterminated, horrible, horrible things, including his whole family, essentially. And then makes it through to the other side of that to invent a whole new field of psychology called logotherapy, write dozens of books on the subject because he knew what his meaning was. He knew what his divine calling was. Now, he doesn't call it divine in the book, Man's Search for Meaning, but he does say that when you know your purpose and you know your meaning, it animates you. And I often get asked, how do you have so much energy? It's because I know why I'm here. I've known why I'm here on earth since I was 7. I was born to change the world for the better through technology. And I've done that as a capitalist. And I've always tried to do it at a bigger and bigger scale with amazing people that I've worked with, and really trying to manifest love inside of the companies that I've started. And I'm in the ultimate manifestation of my career right now because I'm operating from this principle that humanity has 10 to 15 years to make it. And I'm 95% certain that we will, but make it to that age of abundance for all. And by all, I mean all. I mean countries like Chad, where the GDP is $660 a person versus our 85,800 here in the US. Like countries that don't have access to a lot of electricity, that don't have access to clean, food that we take for granted here, that don't have access to clean water, don't have access to healthcare. How do we help those types of countries? The only way we do it, frankly, is an acceleration with AI and robots. That's it. I mean, who else is going to care about Chad and go in? There's no money to be made in Chad. They have to go in with something that breaks the cost curve, where AI, I think, is going to lead to a breakthrough in material science.
Already is.
Yeah.
Already is. I was just listening to,
Think about the protein folding problem being solved by AlphaFold.
Yeah.
By Google DeepMind.
There are
Now apply that to all material science.
both fully automated labs. I was just hearing about one in Germany, or was it Japan? It's either Germany or Japan, which just had a fully automated lab that was exploring new materials and came up with a new battery.
Yeah.
And it's exploring experiments, designing new experiments, and just run on automation.
Yeah.
So there is definitely going to be more of that. There's going to be new, certainly material science and biology, which is an area we invest in, is going to be hugely impacted by this. We are now just at the beginning stages of thinking of biology not as an area of study, but as an engineering platform. So what does that mean? Well, the earliest stages, we're going to have new drugs that are more effective. They're non-toxic, and they're highly accurate. So those are simple things. And then we will be, and people are, as you know, Mika, is designing cells.
Yeah.
And so
I'm
we're
an investor in me.
yeah. And so right. Wish we hadn't launched the fund yet. So we're going to be engineering cells. We're going to be engineering tissues, and we're actually going to be engineering them, not tinkering. We're still at the tinkering stage, doing little bits of design of molecules and proteins, and we can engineer new functions there.
Yeah.
But that's the level of control at the atomic level. We're essentially building water-based nanotechnology. That's what biology is. And that's going to be a huge, huge change. We may have clean chemical plants. There are all kinds of, a boundless future, I think, that we can have come out of that.
Yeah. And let's be frank, like we have real serious problems, right? Climate change is real. And, if we had unlimited energy or nearly unlimited energy from the sun, through material science breakthrough, like huge breakthroughs in battery, everything, my good friend, Pablo Holman,
I
who,
was just thinking about
yeah,
Pablo's
yes.
sending those,
Okay, so
invest in the company that's sending those satellites up to collect solar energy.
yes,
And
and
yeah.
his book, Deep Future, amazing book. I wrote a long review of it recently on my blog and on Medium, etc. But Deep Future essentially says, look, the Maslow hierarchy, the bottom should be energy, and it's such a brilliant observation because everything starts with energy. Because if we had nearly unlimited energy, you could desalinate the water completely easily. You could power an army of robots to go build whatever you want in Chad, go build all the electrical capacity that they need, go build all the solar farms, go build all the healthcare that they need, powered by AI and robots, et cetera. And that would be a beautiful future because you're talking about if you can develop an oasis in Chad, you could develop an oasis anywhere.
Yeah.
And that is the future that I want for humanity.
Super
I have
exciting one.
deep love for humanity. I have not given up on humanity and I never will give up on humanity. Um, Again, that was the part that made my heart hurt at the dinner that we had over here. Because I think it's very dangerous to give up on humanity. It makes people actually start to say, well, AI is already conscious. It's like a cheapening actually of humanity itself.
Well, they want some other authority other than other people,
Yeah.
because trust in other humans is very low.
Yeah.
And that's probably because people are committed to a very materialist way of thinking about their role in the
Yeah.
world. And so all of these things come back to, I think, understanding consciousness and understanding what we are and understanding the causes in the world are
Yeah.
not just mechanistic.
Yeah.
They're actually driven by purpose as well. And there's something that happens once you start taking it seriously and realizing this is actually a fundamental part of the world, not just an epiphenomenon that's floating on top of your neurons.
Right.
It's not just that. There's actually a profound truth inside. Actually, we're dealing with the real stuff of the universe is awareness, at least in addition to the other things.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to make the panpsychist claim. I don't know. I don't want to commit to metaphysics, but we know that that stuff is fundamental, and that's wonder making.
It's amazing. Yeah. Yeah. You actually just made me think of another book, called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. Actually, Taro, the founder of Four Sigmatic, turned me on to that book. He's going to be on soon. And that book, oh my gosh, it's his lectures about waking up, and about getting in touch with your soul, with yourself. And he's like the George Carlin of spiritual teachers. So if you haven't listened to that one, Taro says it's his favorite book out of 130 books he's read on spirituality. And it is so much fun. I've recommended that book now to so many people because on Audible, he's making you laugh out loud, and you know how truth is. I mean, comedy can be such a great truth serum, right? Comedians can actually change the world. George Carlin, I'll never forget his rant on stuff. My dad was a big George Carlin fan.
Yeah, comedy is really, it's quite an art form. I've only started, diving into this here in Austin because there's such a big comedy scene.
I know.
We went and saw
We had
Louis
thing
C.K.
happening off.
Yeah, another thing happening. We went and saw Louis C.K. the other day, just a sidebar.
That's awesome.
That was crazy. That was like being in a rock concert.
Yeah.
The jokes just didn't stop, and you felt like you were on a roller coaster
Yeah.
at a rock concert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's an amazing thing too of like how all of these things, these cultural, experiences, I used to take as enjoyment,
Mhm.
leisure, and really not signifying more than that, as well as rituals, all of these things that people would do.
Yeah.
I would say, they're kind of related to our bodily functions. They don't really represent anything that's more substantial than that. All of these states of our being or enjoyments.
Yeah.
And that has also changed for me because No, what I kind of look at this like is that these are different states of a fundamental field, put in materialist
Yeah,
terms.
sure.
And exploring those states is actually really fundamental. It's almost like what the universe is here for
Right.
is to explore those things. And there's a very different viewpoint in thinking about all of these things which affect our states. Because I used to push all of these things aside, not comedy per se, but practices of looking inward, doing therapy, all of these things of people have problems and they have to deal with it. Well, this is a healthcare
Right.
situation.
Right.
I don't need any of that.
Right. Right.
And I've taken a very different view of that because it is like examining and exploring that is like frontier work. It is because, and you can only see it for yourself,
Yeah. You have to
literally.
experience it.
You experience it for yourself, and so it's not just some, say, primitive human activity. Like there are rituals, for instance, and people might beat some drums and make noises. I could take this stuff seriously. So what are you really doing? You're just making something happen in your brain, but it doesn't really mean anything else. But I take a different view of it now, in that consciousness is a real thing. And our modality for impacting it is through these primate bodies. And so these things which seem very connected to primate rituals and primate behaviors are actually just the interface
Right.
into that.
Yeah.
And so there's a recoding of so much stuff in the world. And I think that those explorations and those things that people do, and those are expanding. They're becoming more important, I think, all over the world now, but I don't know because my bubble is filled with these people, and Austin
My
is filled
Yeah.
with these people. And I think that that's part of where the new economy goes once AI automates everything.
Yeah.
If we can get through uh, that eye of the needle of the economic singularity
Yeah.
that AI represents as it eliminates labor, because that's what it will do. That is its job within capitalism,
Right.
is to reduce cost.
Right.
And cost comes from human labor. We are on a scary journey into that
Right.
eye of the needle.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it is what makes us human, which is consciousness. And we already see here this flowering of the consciousness economy. And that's also something I'm really excited about. And I haven't been part of that,
Yeah.
but all of my friends here are.
Well, it's not, I will tell you that, people tell me that I am being quote unquote brave to talk about at conferences my belief in the divine and the unity of science and spirituality. And I want to be clear, like I very much believe in science. And I think we've established that through our conversation here. But I very much also believe in the divine, in soul and spirit. And the unification of those things, when I talk about it, and I talk about the hard problem of consciousness in this exponential age of AI, quantum computing, robotics, I cannot tell you the number of people that come up to me afterwards thanking me. And these are like hardcore technologists. Like they're like, thank you so much for being brave enough to talk about these things in this way because they're feeling it.
Do you find that people say that here or in other places? Everywhere,
Everywhere.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So that tells me I'm in a big bubble.
Well, I do think that it's happening a lot in Austin, which is great. I was born and raised here. I mean,
Well, do you think people saying that you're brave is happening here or it's happening elsewhere?
Oh, it is primarily happening elsewhere, but here when I give talks, I spend hours after the talk talking with people because so many
Everybody is dialed in.
yes,
Yeah.
people are so dialed in. And it's interesting because I don't feel brave. I really don't.
It's just real,
Yes.
and we need to talk about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just feel like I I one thing about me that people that know me really well is I have to be authentic. I cannot be a fraud. So I have to tell you the truth. I have to present myself in a very authentic way. Now, that doesn't mean, I won't get dressed for a conference and try to, be the avatar to fit, some part of that. But I'm going to dress pretty much like I'm dressed now. I'm going to be like comfortable and like present myself the way I would. I'm not going to show up at a conference in Lululemon shorts and a crappy t-shirt like I'd wear at home when I'm writing code. Like I'm, going to be presentable, but I'm going to be very honest with people. And, I am not worried about if some people just write me off as a result.
Well,
Because I'm operating from this principle. It's really important to talk about this principle that I'm operating from. I'm curious if you're operating from this principle. I really think that A, humanity is going to make it to this age of abundance for all. And B, I think we have the next 10 to 15 years to make it. And so if I am operating from this principle of working backwards from that moment, whatever people want to call that moment, some people call that moment all types of things like the singularity, et cetera. And I think that's a misnomer for it. But if I'm working backwards from that point, and I believe that that is in humanity's future, then I'm saying, what can I do today to impact that, to hopefully make this 5% chance that we destroy ourselves disappear to the greatest of my ability. And to be clear, I'm not looking at myself as some kind of world savior. I am looking at myself as part of the light to help us make it there. And I believe that Dimas Hassibis is part of the light. I believe Mustafa Soliman is, Dr. Fifi Lee, Mira Murati, Reid Hoffman. I mean, Eric Schmidt co-wrote Genesis. You can't make up the titles of these books. It's called Genesis with Henry Kissinger and Craig Mundie. It was Henry Kissinger's dying work. It was his swan song to humanity. And he passed away, I think, 2 weeks after he finished writing that book. And that book is a prayer from Henry Kissinger for humanity to make it to this age, to not destroy ourselves. And if I was an alien, and I came to Earth and I knew nothing about humanity, one of the things I would quickly dial into is that we have nuclear weapons. Okay. And we have those for good reason. We needed to end World War II. If the Nazis got it, it would have been very problematic, right? And so we're in an existential race versus the Nazis to save, humanity essentially from a total totalitarian, regime that was incredibly dehumanizing. And so, Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer and others invented this very destructive technology. And, we've all seen the movie Oppenheimer by Christopher Nolan. But if I just knew nothing about humanity, I would zero in on that threat. And I would say, oh, okay, they have these nuclear weapons. Well, how powerful is? Okay, they're very powerful. Wow. How many of them do they have? And what would be your guess percentage-wise on today's nuclear arsenal? What percent of today's nuclear arsenal do you think it would take to destroy all the major cities in the world and send humanity and all the animals on this planet into a nuclear winter that lasts at least a decade? And
okay, I'm pretty sure I've heard this, and it's some tiny fraction of it,
What
like
per-
1 or 2%.
okay,
that-
that's 2%.
Yeah.
Okay, most people that I ask this guess 20%, 50%. So we have 50 times more nuclear weapons than would be needed to essentially wipe out humanity and so many creatures on this earth. And then you could ask yourself, well, is humanity still building these? And the answer is sadly, yes. China's never been building more. And then you would ask yourself, what is this called? Do you know what it's called? There's an acronym for it.
No. Oh, mutually assured destruction. Yes.
What is that? What is that?
Mad.
Yeah. It's insane. Right?
Yeah.
And it's a disease, right? And humanity is playing a psychological trick on each other, saying, look, if I have the most destructive toys, that if you screw with my playground, I will literally destroy
Game theory.
humanity.
It's game theory, right? And that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
It's coming from a rational calculus,
Right.
a limited rational
Making
calculus.
real weapons.
Yes.
Like these are not fake weapons.
Oh yeah.
If
Very material.
if people want to write me off, watching this, say, okay, well, I don't believe in near-death experiences and that I don't believe in any of this stuff. well, this is very real. This is very real science, 2%. And this is a disease that humanity has to transcend, and it has to transcend it while we're dealing with the most exponential technology curve in the history of humanity. And the way I view this period, and it's a very real vision I received, and it's actually the first short story in the lattice. It really is God's final exam for humanity. Now, whether you want to look at that as nature or consciousness or whatever you want to call that, I believe that it's God working through us, and that when we have that divine spark, and I've had that divine spark in every company I've started. I've had that, just, I know this is it. I know this is right. I know this is where technology is going to go. And I credit that as part of the divine. And I've been divinely guided in my career, and I'm being divinely guided now. And so when you have that, knowledge that God is working through us and God is testing us and saying, with power that is God-like, what will you do with it? Are you going to use it for good to create a world of abundance for all, and realize that we're all essentially genetically the same, and that we need to deprogram and create that beautiful, merger of, whether you look at it metaphorical or mystical, of heaven and earth coming together, which has been prophesied in every ancient spiritual tradition, that I want that world for us, right? And that alternative is a world working with tools this powerful of death and destruction. And the job dislocation is a very real issue, but it creates very real possibilities of abundance that we won't need to worry about.
On the other side,
Scarcity.
on the other side,
On the other side, we have to make it through.
we have to make it through it.
And that's going to be tough.
That is tough.
And I'm writing about it in a very real way in my book. My book is called Love Conquers Fear, with the subtitle Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All. And I'm tackling the biggest problems we have to solve. So I don't want to act like it's all love and rainbows. I mean, I know the title's Love Conquers Fear, but it's going to be tough to make it through this period. But it's the ultimate test. Whether you look at it as the evolutionary test. I mean, Earth has been around for 4.54 billion years. The sun has been around for 4.6 billion years. Life on Earth has been around for 4 billion years. Hominids have been around for 4 million years. So we're a blip in evolutionary timescale. And Homo sapiens even shorter, 250,000 years. And one of the things my good friend Byron Reese told me, he's going to be on this podcast too. I love his books, by the way. But he's a real futurist and a very good historian. And he told me that there was a point in time that Homo sapiens was down to 800 to several thousand people, 50 to 70,000 years ago. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad you know that, because most people I tell don't know that. And so if our core nature was just to be evil, that would have been it. Human experiment over, right? We're in the ice age. There was a super volcano event. It blacked out the sun and the skies, where we were really suffering, and we came together. So that is our core nature. And we also have to get back to being human, to realize what's at stake and how we need to transcend.
Yeah.
And I think the amazing thing is, I believe in reincarnation, is that you and I chose to reincarnate in this lifetime to tackle this issue. That's kind of mind blowing in and of itself.
Many people are being drawn to this cause, and it's
For sure.
it's a strange.
It's amazing who's showing up for me right now.
It is
So many people
amazing
in my life. It's amazing.
Constantly.
And yours too.
Mine too. And I had a conversation with, and I remembered in my mind's eye, walking around Lake Austin. We started at the library.
Mm-hmm.
He said that the message that he received is that the frequency and intensity will increase. It was just at the beginning,
Yeah.
like days into the beginning of whatever's happening in my life right now. And, I listened to that, and I had confirmation of some of the things that he had experienced were remarkably similar to things that I had learned, very anomalous things. And that is what I've experienced.
Yeah.
The frequency and intensity of people's experiences and the number of people who are being called into this field
Yeah.
to work on this, to work on how we get through that,
Yeah.
how we evolve to a next step, because our current mode of operating is obviously very broken and everybody
Yes.
feels it.
Yeah.
And so there's material cause, you could say, that people are responding to that, but there are anomalous experiences that people are having that are driving them into this. Many, many of them. And that's very weird.
Yeah.
And that,
It's very beautiful.
it's also very beautiful. And, a friend of mine,
I look at it as part of the divine awakening us.
who was kind of there with me, a friend of mine, when I first sort of experienced, I guess in this most recent part of my life, a series of profound synchronicities and weird understandings about consciousness. Um, recently said to me, "Love has already won." And that's a very different perspective on all of this. It's not a struggle or a fight.
I heard this, by the way, this weekend.
Did you?
Yes. From a woman who's deeply, deeply connected to source and spirituality.
And that's the
You realize
perspective.
that love has already
It's already
in the
won.
future. And she says, I've seen it and it already did win. Um, and time we know is an illusion. Like, you kind of touched on time earlier, but if someone just wants to take a science-based approach to time, they should read The Order of Time
Yes.
by Rebelling.
Yes. I love that book.
And oh my gosh, it's narrated by Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes. Did I recommended that to you, didn't I?
I don't know. You may have.
I think I
No, I appreciate it. It's one of my favorites now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Actually, you are probably right. You probably did recommend it. I apologize. I didn't remember that. It's cool that I brought it up though.
Yeah.
Those
No, that's really one of my favorite books too, because it's so mind
And it
bending.
gets mystical.
Yeah.
He doesn't write it to be mystical. He writes it to just be a science.
Yeah.
Talking about the illusion of time. I mean, he talks about the order of time, but essentially,
And the
how
order
is
of
it?
time entirely comes from the ability to perceive. That is, to be able to detect properties, which would, you need to have properties that you can detect so that you can see entropy. Because entropy is
Yes.
defined in terms of disorder, but what defines disorder is the arrangement of things according to properties.
Right.
And so, it opens up, he kind of just very opens up the door just slightly to saying, if you had a different set of properties that you were perceiving, there could be a different order of time, because that's the only place that we get an ordering within our physics as far as we know it. It's just according to seeing this thing that we call entropy increasing.
Yeah.
But, from a different perspective, you might have different types of entropy increasing or different kinds of orderings of time. And so that's a very deeply mind-blowing perspective.
And that book ends in such a loving way because it really ends with discovery of the self.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost like the Gita in
Yeah.
a science book on time. It's really, really amazing. So I want to shift just for a moment and go to more about your fund because I find your fund really fascinating. And my opinion of your fund is that it's part of the light for us to make it to the age of abundance for all. So tell me about your fund. I know you work on it with your wife.
We started thinking about this right before ChatGPT hit. And I did a dive on what was happening in AI and why it was, I'd gotten signals that was much more effective this time. And I'd known about AI since the 90s, and it was never very exciting. AI, the deep learning kind, was just kind of a statistical toolkit, just like all kinds of machine learning technologies like support vector machines and, all the whole smorgasbord of different analytical and data analysis techniques,
Mhm.
and so you'd use AI for classifying. And now there was something else that was happening. And also the other problem was you could only do shallow networks. You couldn't really do deep networks. There was this thing called the vanishing gradient problem. I heard that had been solved, and there were some other things happening that were interesting. And I read the Attention is All You Need paper to really understand what all the pieces of the technology,
Right.
all those bits of technology that contributed to that, and why was it working? Why was it doing something interesting? And that really led us to think, and that made me realize how general these insights were.
Mm.
One of them is actually just a dirty hack, as it turns out, which is this thing called the LRU, which is basically an if-then statement, and it violates the beautiful mathematics that's behind the chain rule.
Mhm.
And it says simply that if a value is less than 0, then set it to 0. So you can't integrate something like that. Calculus doesn't work on if then statements.
Seems very problematic to my mathematical.
Yeah, it is very problematic.
Mathematics is my favorite subject.
And this fixes the vanishing gradient problem. So you actually can build much deeper networks. And I think that this is an unsung hero
Mhm.
of AI. I don't think people think about that a lot. And then that really made me realize something, that these techniques in transformers, but also all kinds of techniques in AI would become much more powerful because you'd actually be able to build deep learning.
Mhm.
And my perspective on what was happening in the tech space was that you're dealing with complex data structure, and there are many complex data structures that can produce value in the world. In fact, even ChatGPT is kind of an example of applying AI to biological data,
Mhm.
because language comes from us and we're biology. So it is biological data,
Absolutely.
and there's lots of biological data, and it is the most complex data we have, amongst the most,
Yeah.
and arguably the most. We just don't know it all yet.
Mhm.
And that made me realize that there was going to be a huge application of AI to the life sciences. And that, that's an idea that people have talked about. Steve Jobs, before he died, was saying that the greatest technology of the next century is going to be an intersection of computer science and biology.
Oh, yeah.
And now, Eric Schmidt's writing about this and saying that, biology is ready for its ChatGPT moment. Oh, we should be ready for that.
Yeah.
And Jensen Huang has made similar statements. SoftBank has called it the next $1 trillion industry.
Yeah.
And there was a sense that we're right at the beginning of it's not just a new technology platform.
Mhm.
This is a new era.
Right.
And I started thinking about that era as the age of biology,
Mhm.
where this is not just an area of study that's coming out of, the academic institutions, and we're figuring things out. We're actually going to be doing things with this, and that's going to define a huge aspect of our future as humans.
Right.
And, there are the low hanging fruit, which are new drugs, new cells, cells that are therapies,
Right.
understanding our own health, optimizing our health, and all kinds of things which are really edgy and challenging, but which I think are also going to come into the market, which is modifying ourselves.
Right.
And I know that that's going to be very triggering for some people, but I think that's naturally going to come out.
I mean, I'm modified right now. I am a product of technology. In this eye, I have -6.5 vision. In this eye, I have -6. And so I'm wearing contact lenses. So I'm already an augmented human being.
Yes, and I mean,
Could put me 200 years ago. I don't know if I'd be a scribe like working at this level because that's all I could see without my contacts. I don't know what I would be doing, but it's liberating, right, that I have this technology. So I think it's inevitable that we're augmented in some ways.
I mean, look, agriculture is highly unnatural.
Mhm.
Um, if we were to go back, we should be hunter gatherers, because agriculture is very weird and unnatural thing. People are actually very sick at the beginning of the agricultural era, and I think I have that tension. There's something very triggering with dealing with biology, but I think that the future for us is very great
Right.
in that. And there are also very many fundamental problems in biotech. We fail 90 to 95% of the time in clinical trials. That's because we're tinkering.
Right.
There's a very traditional model of drug development, which is, you know, biotechs by and large, and I'm painting with a broad brush, uh, are things which discover the biology, which then traditional pharma companies and medicinal chemistry says, we're going to do the same thing that we've done for a few hundred years, which is develop small molecule compounds. And that is a very old, ancient, broken system that's driven by human medicinal chemists developing drugs in a kind of cottage industry fashion. And there's so much complexity that humans really can't design the things that nature designs, which tend to be larger, more complicated, and much more precise. And so that's the opportunity that AI gives us. So we're going to have drugs which tend to be less toxic, less and less toxic, more engineerable. We'll be able to solve disease much better, and we'll be able to lead healthier lives as a result of this. The other side of the fund is also thinking about,
And tell me the name of the fund again.
it's called Humain Ventures,
Human
MAIN.
Ventures, yeah.
Um, and the other side of it too is, people ask us, oh, so you're a med tech fund or you're a healthcare fund. We're not a healthcare fund. We specifically stay away from investing in anything in the healthcare industry, which just sounds weird because we're investing in life science and surely that touches the healthcare industry. And one of the things that, I wrote a paper about this actually. I should share it with you. I don't think I
I've seen
have.
it on your Substack
Okay. And
in terms of announcing the fund and the thesis for the fund.
yeah, this is actually about a model for insurance.
Okay.
And
I haven't seen that.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is another thing that we've been thinking about is that we didn't want to invest in the existing healthcare industry because, you know, it is the number one cause of personal bankruptcies in the US.
Really?
The number one cause.
Did not know that.
I mean, there is something
I mean, it makes sense because like cancer can cost over $1 million to
in this country.
try to treat.
Yes, that's right. And, there are all of these costs, and these costs are actually coming from underlying incentive structures. And we didn't want to participate in that. We didn't want to participate in just adding to the power of an industry that was harming people's finances.
Right.
And so there's a way out of that. And I think that that place is in thinking about direct to consumer health. That's not the solution, of course. That's just a part of the solution. But the right model of healthcare is AI driven, direct to consumer, with lower expense, but also with the right incentives. Because the incentives right now are to sell you something and you profit because people are sick. But the right healthcare system should be incentivized for long and healthy lives. And so that's something I've been writing about, thinking about, talking with folks in the government about how do we structure a healthcare system that promotes that, that also uses the power of the market to incentivize innovation to do that. And so if we can do that, that will be very powerful and good for humanity. And so we're investing now in technologies that are going to be part of that new place, which are things which directly deliver preventive and longevity healthcare to consumers. And that's kind of how we think about that side of it. And, my my partner, Linda, started 23andMe. So she's been very deeply involved in digital health. She was the first US advisor for the Aura Ring and was first on the first director, independent board director at Rock Health, which launched the digital health revolution.
Or as a friend of mine, and wow, it's great to see how good they're doing.
Yeah, they're doing great.
They're really, really
Yeah.
passionate right now.
Yeah, and I think that they're
I'm not an
really,
investor, but big fan.
yeah, it's it's a great company. And just thinking about those modalities that people can use in their everyday lives, and that are going to improve their health and that enable them to be free and also prevent disease. That's the right incentive.
Right.
So we're really interested in those kinds of things.
That's cool. That's really cool. And thinking about your background, like you coming here today and us being able to do this and all the things that have led up to you being you today. Like going back in time, what were your biggest influences? Like who was the young Aneil? And what were all the things, that
Oh,
I know we don't have
that's a long that's a long
I
story.
know, but what were the biggest influences that led to you, evolving to who you are today and saying, this is my calling?
Well, this calling on consciousness that I put it aside for a very long time. I really just put aside thinking about these topics and just became pure materialist, rationalist, and scientist for about 20 years. But when I was young, I remember there was this time when I grew up in Saskatchewan and the Gideons handed out Bibles in elementary school. And I had one of those little red Bibles and I took it home and I went into my closet and I read it secretly. I don't know why I was reading it secretly. I just thought I'd have questions to answer from the parents if I was caught with as what am I doing reading this Bible? So I was reading it and I was trying to make sense of it. I couldn't make hide or tail of the statements that were in there, but I knew something that it was about good and bad, and I knew it was all about morality. I was trying to figure it out, and I started thinking about that. Put the Bible away, and started thinking about that when I was around 10 and I somehow realized that our conscious experience is the whole reason that anything is valuable because that's where values reside. And so I realized, oh, it's this consciousness stuff. So I had this kind of consciousness realization moment when I was 10. And then I constructed this crazy.
Mind of itself, by the way, is a act of sentience and an act of conscience.
Yeah, that's right. So I knew at least at 10 I was
You
conscious.
have to think deeply like that and have a experience and a realization about consciousness when you're aged in depends on you actually being conscious.
It does. So that's proof I was conscious at 10,
Sure.
at the very least. But I was
Right,
also
but if
pretty.
we talk about this with machines, it's kind of a funny aside.
But I was also very stupid, and I thought, oh, consciousness comes from complexity in the brain.
Right, right,
I had that dumb idea
right,
in my head,
right.
and I thought that you know the valuable thing to do is to create more of that type of complexity, which would give rise to more consciousness. That has to be the ground for what is valuable. That was my thinking. And I got so bound up in this Benthamite kind of version of what I should do next. And I had no idea what to do. And I was emotionally and mentally paralyzed for about 3 weeks. Like I was really in psychological distress.
Right,
And I said, okay, I'm going to stop that.
right.
So that was kind of like an origination point for that. And I
Touched the frontier and it was a little bit too hot.
yeah, that's right. That's right. But then, I grew up as a good Indian boy in Saskatchewan where all the doctors are Indians and all the Indians are doctors.
Right, right.
And when my uncles and aunties would ask me, so Anil, what are you specializing in? That had a precise answer.
Right,
It was a specialty of medicine.
right.
So that's why I studied biology, really. But I was computing the whole way around because my dad tricked me
Yeah.
when I was young because I wanted an Atari. And
I had an Atari.
yeah,
That
just
that
see, your dad got you that. I didn't get
that
an
was
Atari.
actually my mom. It was my mom.
No, I didn't get an Atari. I got
Really?
I got
Oh.
I got a trash 80 color computer.
Oh, yeah.
And my dad said, it has games on it.
TRS 80, but yeah, we did call it the trash 80.
Oh,
I
oh,
never had
they
one.
had the worst games.
Yeah.
The worst
They
games.
did have the worst.
And so I
That's how I learned how to program.
yeah, that's why I learned how to program.
1979.
I was tricked into it basically by my dad.
Yeah.
I think he kind of like chuckled about it
Oh,
because he knew.
he knew it.
I think he kind of knew.
Oh,
He kind of knew.
that's actually kind of yeah.
So then, I started typing in games in BASIC and that's how I got started with computing. And, after that in grad school and all the way through, I was just writing code and, I built automated microscope rigs and did deconvolution on three-dimensional fluorescent images and recovered the recovered the structure of these three-dimensional cells and was doing algorithms there. And then I ended up at Millennium Pharmaceuticals, where I did more of the same and also built life science innovations there. So that, for me, science was always about technology. And that was the interesting thing for me, was the technology. I didn't want to just discover that. I would say that I'd be happy reading 100 postdoc lives in one line of a New York Times article. I really cared if the outcome was something that I could use, then I was interested in it. And that's why I ended up at Millennium, which was doing, they were the kind of the first company really doing high throughput biology at scale. And that for me was the promised land, because pipetting small amounts of, 5 microliters of liquid from a tube to a tube seemed like insanity. I just wanted to stop that after grad school. And so using robots and developing new techniques for doing biology at scale. And back then it was discovery biology. And that's what Millennium's core technology business was all about. And they were the third biggest genome sequencing operation during the human genome era, and did, the biggest deals at the time with Bayer and Aventis and all the big pharma companies. And I was lucky enough to be part of the process technology core. And that is, those places are rare, um, because most of biotech and pharma are scientists, they're biologists who are doing biology, and they understand all the details of the pathways. But this kind of crew of people, where you have physicists and engineers and computer scientists and sort of jack of all trades types like me, that creates this ability to invent new technologies, which then do these, which level up our ability to interrogate biology or now do things with biology. And so that really has informed how I think about things. There aren't too many folks like that. And that's the community that really needs to be built in this area, both for the investment side, and that is what's coming out of the universities. So the founders in this space, this tech bio space, as we call it, like technology biology, not biology driven tech, which is the old world. Um, this space is more like Silicon Valley in that the founders tend to have integrated in their own minds a whole bunch of different approaches, and they may change the way they approach, say, drug discovery. And that doesn't really happen with a big team in a kind of committee setting. The drug industry, the pharma industry has, very standard pipeline stages, and they have specialists in each of those stages. And if you want to break the mold, it looks more like what innovators in Silicon Valley do. They just have a new idea and they can do it quickly. And they bring a whole bunch of technologies and change the layout of the way they approach the discovery process. That is a very, very important place for us to be investing.
Yeah.
And so that's really what the fund is, and like how I came to it, and how Linda came to it as well, because she was also in science. She was at the first gene chip company called Affymetrix, and was involved in, finding the variations in the human genome. And that's what at this company called Perligen, where they were doing the very first genome-wide association studies. And that, as well as her finding the spit tubes at some industry conference. I said, you can get DNA from spit. And she didn't believe it.
Right.
She went back to the company. They told her to spit into it, and then they ran her DNA,
Right.
and it worked. And that gave her it was actually the pushback from HR, who said, you have to sign all these forms
Right.
before we give you your data. What are you going to do with it? And then she said, we should have something like 23andMe. And that's how that got started.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What a background. I mean, that's incredible. Well, the world is much better for you being in it, and I look forward, brother, to working alongside you, and hopefully we bring in the age of abundance for all together, and all the other people bring the light to do it. So this was awesome. Yeah. Thanks again. Yeah, you bet. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to Love Conquers Fear. Stay tuned. I've got a huge lineup of spiritual teachers, philosophers, scientists, and investors, entrepreneurs. I'm loving doing this, and I hope you're loving the journey as well. And hopefully, a lot of you out there are getting inspired to, join some of the ventures that have been talked about on here, or go out there and be a part of the light yourself, or explore some of the books that I mentioned on the podcast to really dive into these subjects. I mean, it's a really interesting mashup of topics, that I've been diving into with AI, quantum computing, consciousness, and of course, spirituality, and seeing the synchronicity in all of those things has been absolutely fascinating. Thanks a lot. See you next time.